The moisture-laden air permeated the leaves, making them seem heavy, like fabric stretched across a tangle of branches. Somewhere in the dense shadows beneath the rainforest canopy, there was a brief shriek, and then a rustle, as if someone had swung quickly from one branch to another. The branches sagged slightly, the leaves quivered, and then fell silent again. There was silence, broken only by the hum of insects and the distant murmur of primates. This was the north of Borneo, one of the last untouched corners of the jungle, where the trees rushed up tens of meters, sheltering in their crowns thousands of invisible inhabitants. Among them was a group of Kalimantan orangutans, some of the last of the species, slowly retreating to the edges of the forests where human-made roads and oil palm plantations had left deep wounds in the earth. A mature male, known to the local rangers as Dio, perched on a powerful branch of a fig tree. His dark eyes watched the cub frolicking nearby, a young female too light for the branches to sag under her weight. She grasped fearlessly at the vines, fingering the bark of the trees, examining the insects barely visible on the rough surface. Dio did not interfere, but he kept his eyes on her. He knew that this forest held not only food and shelter, but also danger. Jiva, the cub's mother, was resting on another branch, breathing heavily after her long journey. She was gaunt, her fur thinning and an old scar running down her wrist. Perhaps she had once been caught in a snare but had managed to escape. Now she was cautious and hardly ever went downstairs. But the cub was unaware of the threats lurking beneath the forest canopy. He jumped to a neighboring branch, then further to the trunk of a dead tree, half covered with vines. Another step, and the branch beneath him snapped. The sharp sound made Jiva flinch. She turned her head the instant the cub slid down, its small fingers unable to grip the slippery bark. A scream, a tug, and the body disappeared into a tangle of vines, down to where the ground, strewn with rotting leaves, hid dangerous burrows and clawed predators. Dio lunged forward. His massive hands gripped the branches tightly, his powerful body tearing downward, following the cub's fall. In that instant, the forest froze. But before its fingers touched the small body, it was over. Jiva saw her cub hanging from the vines, bent, but not falling. Her breath hitched, but he was alive. When Dio reached him, however, it was clear. His paw was twisted unnaturally, something broken in his wrist. Among wild orangutans, an injury to a limb is almost a sentence. Their life is all about movement, climbing, jumping. A cub unable to hold onto branches would quickly lose its chance of survival. Jiva reached down. Carefully, she picked the cub up under his belly, supporting him with her healthy paw. She could feel the pain in his body, but didn't know what to do. She licked the fur on his forehead, soothing him, but the pain wouldn't go away. Dio looked down, then out beyond the trees, where it smelled not of forest, but of metal and plastic and smoke. There lay the boundary of the reserve, where people set up their posts, where the loud sounds of cars sometimes came from, where trails stretched out, not left by claws but trampled by boots. He knew that humans were always a risk, but he also knew humans could heal. Dio looked at Jiva, then back there again, toward the border, and this time he moved first. That same day, Ranger Anil Kanti was checking the poachers' traps. It was his job to watch the forest, to find signs of illegal hunting, to clean the metal snares left at watering holes. He had known this forest since he was a child. His parents were part of the Iban tribe who lived here long before the reserves. He respected the forest, but he also knew that without people, it would disappear. As Anil climbed the ridge, his radio crackled with static. "Anil, we have a strange situation. Cameras have captured a large male and a female with a cub. They're moving toward the cordon. Something's wrong." He's frowning. "Are they scared?" "They're not running away. They're coming straight for us." Anil froze. It was unnatural. Orangutans avoided humans. But here was a male, an adult, strong, what the villages called a Dagon, the spirit of the forest. He comes out to them. Anil descended faster. By the time he reached the border, the sun was setting. In the distance, silhouettes moved in the orange light. Dark, fluid, moving from branch to branch. When they stopped 20 meters away from the humans, Anil could make out the face of the male. There was no fear in Dio's eyes, but there was something different. Some kind of knowledge. He stepped forward, then backed away, as if hesitating. But then, as if making a decision, he raised a paw and pushed the small body in front of him. The cub lay on the ground. One paw was bent at a strange angle. Anil slowly stepped forward. Silence rang all around. The forest seemed to be quiet, watching. The male, Dio, didn't make a sound, but every muscle in his body was ready to lunge. The jiva slumped a little farther away, tensing but didn't move. Only her eyes darted between the ranger's face and the body of the small orangutan lying on the ground. Anil squatted down carefully, showing his palms. He knew it was important to take his time. On the border of worlds, every movement carries weight. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt it." The cub whimpered softly, his breathing hitching. His right paw was already swollen, its fur torn away in places. He groaned as he tried to move, and Jiva lunged forward. But Dio only growled softly, not at her, but as if into the space between them and the humans. It was as if he were saying, "Wait." When Anil examined the injured limb, it was clear. A fracture. Without intervention, the little one would not be able to move, much less climb. That meant hunger or prey. He made a short call on the radio. "We have a forearm fracture in the young one. The primate group is cooperating." Repeat, cooperating. "We need a rescue team with immobilization. Gentle restraints only. Now." The answer came immediately. The wind from the mountains carried a voice. "Copy that. We're sending a mobile station. We'll be there in 40 minutes. Anil stayed with them. He slowly sat on the ground to the side, keeping his eyes on the adult orangutans. Dio kept his gaze on him but did not approach him again. Jiva walked over to the cub and hugged him, resting her cheek against his back. She didn't take him back to the tree. It was as if she knew he belonged here with them now. The team arrived already at dusk. The full moon illuminated the clearing. 2 men in protective coveralls stood in the headlights. They carried with them a plastic capsule that looked like half a cocoon. As they stepped out, Dio let out a muffled growl. One of the rangers, a young boy named Matteo, flinched involuntarily. "It's under control," Anil said. "He won't attack if we don't threaten him." The operation was quick. First, a small dose of sleeping pills administered from a safe distance. Then, a careful transfer to the stretcher. Jiva tried to obstruct, but Dio once again stood between her and the humans. He showed no aggression. He just stood there. An insurmountable barrier. Half an hour later, they departed. The cub was inside the capsule, paw already fixed. Jiva stood at the edge of the forest, making soft, guttural sounds. Her voice carried in the wind as the car drove away. Anil did not move away from her till the end. He watched Jiva's eyes follow the headlights until they disappeared around the corner. Then she slumped to the ground, exhausted with anxiety. Back at the base at the rehabilitation center, the long days began. The cub, they named him Lino, was examined daily, inflammation was managed, and his response to analgesics was monitored. He was weakened, but fought for life with the tenacity of a jungle animal. In the first few days, he cried at night, calling for his mother. Later, more quietly. After a week, he began to accept bananas from her hand. 10 days later, laughing when a gust of wind rippled the leaves outside the window. Anil visited him every day. He didn't just monitor his vitals. He talked to Lino as an equal. He told him how Jiva slept under the fig tree, how Dio never left the clearing, said they were waiting. And Lino seemed to understand. Meanwhile in the forest, Dio and Jiva remained. Their behavior had changed. They no longer went deeper into the thicket. Every day they approached the border. Repeatedly, the cameras recorded Jiva bringing branches, soft leaves, and laying them on the spot where Lino had last lain. She waited. On the 15th day, The wind brought the first rain. The forest greened to a new rhythm, and Lino rose to his feet for the first time. He tentatively held onto the rung, then fell, but he didn't cry. He got up again. His arm was in a bandage, but his grip reflex had returned. "He's ready," Anil said that evening. "Back in a couple days. No cage, just us and him." Consent to release was rare. Usually the animals were taken deep inside, to hidden areas. But Anil insisted on bringing him back where he was welcome. The Jiva might not accept him if the trail was gone. But here, there was a chance. On the morning of the 21st day, with the dripping rain and the first bursts of birds, Lino returned. The graduation took place in the same clearing, under the same foliage. The team stopped 100 meters away. Lino slowly stepped out of the van. He paused, taking in the smells. His eyes narrowed. He knew this place. He turned, looked at Anil. The other nodded. "Go." The small body took a step, then another, and again. Jiva emerged from behind the trees. She didn't make a sound. She just stopped. Then she rushed forward, not towards the people, to Lino. She threw her arms around him, pulling him against her. A loud scream rang through the clearing. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was the voice of life. Dio appeared from behind. He walked over, looked at Anil, then at Lino, for a long moment, then nodded, barely noticeable but not casually. It had been a week since Lino had returned to the forest. His arm wasn't fully healed. He couldn't climb as well as before, but he was back to grasping low vines, pulling himself up, swinging. Jiva stayed with him as if she was afraid he would disappear again. She put him to bed, brought him fruit, plucked moss, and put it under his head like a pillow. But what was most surprising was Dio. He was no longer just observing. He began to teach. He swayed the vines so that Lino would learn to hold onto the movable supports. He climbed down from the branches, showed him how to pick out the sturdy limbs. Sometimes he even let Lino climb himself as if he were a tree, a privilege not every adult male allowed even to his children. Anil watched from the sidelines. First in person, from behind the bushes, later through the cameras. He did not interfere, just watched, noted, recorded. The group's behavior was changing. They became less fearful. When people approached, they didn't run away, but backed away. But most importantly, Lino was part of them again. In the forest, it was the time of the wet storms. The rains fell from morning to evening, lifting the fog, turning the ground into a viscous clay-smelling pulp. Everything in the jungle either flowed, grew, or moved. Food became more plentiful, vines softer, trees taller. Lino was gaining strength. One day, at dawn, the cameras recorded him climbing a tall tree by himself, for the first time without anyone's help. Jiva watched from below. Dio stepped forward. Now he knew the group was safe. The branches sagged, but Lino held on. His paw was working. He clung, he jumped, he shrieked with joy. He lived. The sanctuary knew that Lino's story was an exception. Usually, injured primates couldn't be returned to the wild. They either lost contact with their mother or became outcasts. But that wasn't the case here. Anil stood at the border. The sun was slowly rising through the foliage, scattering blue patches of mist. He held the tablet in his hands, watching the footage of Jiva putting Lino to bed, and the half-asleep man scratching her fur as if he remembered the touch of a human. There was something strange about that. Not fear, not disgust, just memory and acceptance. "Do you think they'll remember us?" Matteo asked, coming up behind him. "I don't think so," Anil answered, not taking his eyes off the screen. "They don't have to. The main thing is not to be afraid." Matteo nodded. Then he added, "What if trouble happens again? If someone gets hurt again and they come?" Anil was silent. Then he said, "Then we will wait again, at the border." Spring passed, and Lino grew older. His arm had fully recovered, and he began to go deeper and deeper into the forest with Jiva and Dio. They never came near the cordon again, but the cameras occasionally caught their silhouettes, the silhouette of the three moving through the twilight like a shadow of an ancient time that was still alive. The rangers called them a forest family now. Not a group, not a pack. Exactly a family. With a history that everyone knew, from the caretakers to the volunteers. A photo of Lino hugging Jiva upon her return hung in the center's main pavilion. But for Lino himself, the story continued. He didn't know words, didn't understand meanings, didn't divide the world into wild and human. He just lived, and he knew that his hand had once hurt. And now it holds it. One day, during the Dipterocarpus blooming season, when the whole forest was filled with the heavy scent of pollen and wet wood, one of the drones transmitted a shot of Lino sitting at the top of a tree, the sun shining in his eyes, holding a large fruit in his paws, sharing it generously with another tiny orangutan. "He will have his own childhood," Anil said quietly, looking at the screen. "Without pain." As the sun sets and the forest fills with the evening rustle, the rangers pass the border again. Sometimes there seems to be something moving among the foliage, familiar but elusive, and if you listen closely, you can pick up a distant rustling, like laughter. It's Lino. He doesn't need help anymore, but he remembers. And somewhere deep in the forest, an adult male, an adult female, and a young primate continue to live, to move, to grow, as they should in the jungle, where life and trust are rare but possible.